out. Okay, fantastic. So I would like to begin this talk by just respectfully mentioning that we're gathered here today on the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam people here on the University of British Columbia campus. And I'm not sure where the rest of you are, but take a moment to reflect that tomorrow is a day to recognize Indigenous peoples and poetry and reconciliation. So again, thank you so much to have you here with us. And the bio disappeared. We're still sorting out our technical details here. Thanks, Trey. This is what happens when you use somebody else's computer. Okay, super. Thank you so much. So it is my very great pleasure to introduce Jean-Henri Morin. He's an associate professor of information systems who's been visiting us here from the University of Geneva Institute of Information Service Science. He holds a PhD and an MSc in Information Systems from the University of Geneva. He's the director of the Bachelor Program in Information Systems and Service Science and president of Think Services, a Geneva-based think tank on service science and innovation, where Think Data CH was designed. He was a professor at Korea University Business School, invited professor at Yonsei School of Business, and invited researcher at Fasu.com in South Korea. In 2001, he was co-founder of a Geneva-based company specializing in corporate performance management solutions. His primary research and practice interest is in information security, with a particular focus on digital rights management in the enterprise sector. His work on exception management in DRM environments has been transferred to the industry in partnership with Fasu.com. His work is within research area of digital responsibility, where he works on blockchain technology, cloud computing, Internet of Things, privacy, data protection, transparency, information risk, and compliance. And he has a keen interest in design thinking as a skill served as a basis for Think Services and the creation of an academic fab lab in the University of Geneva. He's the author of a book on digital responsibility, published by Editions, where he argues the value of informed trust and transparency is the basis of an emerging principle of co-compliance, collaborative compliance, and is published in international journals and conferences. So thank you so much, Jean-Henri, for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Vicky, for this very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be hosted here, and I thank you for hosting me this month of September here at UBC and the Blockchain UBC Research Cluster. This being said, thanks for the kind introduction. As you've heard, I mean, there are kind of many hats that I will touch upon. The idea today, and I think this is an interesting point that I'd like to make, because the point is to try to engage in the conversation also together and to try to throw a little bit of some ideas to take some ideas maybe further or do some things together. This would be good. But I'd like to start by laying a little bit of the ground. So I entitled this talk Digital Responsibility. So trying to figure out why it's important and desirable for a trustworthy, responsible, and sustainable digital society. So part of my work deals today with addressing that issue, bridging the gap between technology and society. And the whole point, basically, is not So I'll try to, I might skip some elements. If you want to download this file, the presentation, you can just click on or you scan the QR code. You get the full slide deck. I might skip a few elements for the sake of discussion. Okay. So if I say I skip this, please bear with me. Don't be upset. It's just to favor the discussion part. So I'd like to go through the three main areas, try to put a little bit of context and background. I think that's important, and look at some of the challenges. I'll try to lay down the framework in which we are looking at digital responsibility, basically three dimensions. that we've been working on. It appears to be pretty robust given the time. We started with this little framework in 2017 with a few colleagues in Korea and the US. And so far, it hasn't proven not to be working. So it apparently makes some sense. And then I'd like to spend some time to talk about corporate digital responsibility, which is one of the three dimensions. I'm trying to look at it from the point of view of an actionable, what can we actually do? So here again, I might skip or go very fast on some examples in order to focus on maybe some more relevant one for the region cluster that you would okay, and then obviously discussion with great pleasure. I'll be around the whole afternoon, and I'll be back again next Tuesday. I'm unfortunately leaving for Stanford on Wednesday. So pleasure talking to you about this. So I'd like to start with this forward just to make sure that we're on a clear page. Technology is here to serve people and society in their practices, in their work, in their living, okay, and not the other way around. But we must absolutely be able to assess both risks and opportunities, okay? And this is even more acutely important than we are living in this dematerialized society, which is service-oriented. Everything is self-service, and everything is getting even worse because everything is going to be operated by bots, okay? I'm having a real problem in my life interacting with a lot of systems now because the first thing that they put on my under my face is a bot, and you know, you say, okay, talk to a representative, and you know, you have to battle strong in order to finally speak to someone. Okay, and this is also part of the things you ask yourself. Okay, is this right? I mean, should I spend 15 minutes of my life battling against an AI bot, you know, to basically talk to somebody? You know, in the old days, you could take a phone and call up, you know, a customer service or a human and say, okay, I have this problem, please help me. In other words, this goes back to asking ourselves, what information society do we want to live in? This is the key question that I've been obsessed with for a long time. Now, again, another piece of forward, digital transformation or transition, however you call it, okay, is not a childhood disease. It's not like chicken pox, okay? It doesn't happen once, you know, like in a revolution. I mean, the World Economic Forum talks about the, you know, the industrial revolution, fourth industrial revolution, and so on. No, it's not a revolution. A revolution is a point in time. There's a before the revolution and an after. Here, we're looking at a process. And this process shows us one thing, is that every day we get nudges from innovation. Every day there's tens, if not hundreds of innovations that come and nudge ourselves in our practice, in our lives, in the way we teach, we work, we love, we interact, we discuss. And the question we should ask ourselves, are these nudges for good? And I'm afraid to say that the only response we can see today is that unfortunately not. And we have a problem with that. So are we building, you know, buying into the utopia the industry is trying to sell us, or are we basically starting to design a dystopia? That's one of the questions we should ask ourselves. A good example of that is smart city, smart homes, smart toothbrush, smart iron machines, smart whatever. Everything has become smart, right? And we're building today cities. If you look at there's a coalition, an international coalition of smart cities that is gathering every year, and every city has its own smart city project. This all relies on IoT devices, but those IoT devices are completely flawed by design because they have no damn security, which was built in by design. Most of these devices are sold, you know, at the local supermarket. You go to Best Buy, you know, where you can buy something and basically bring it home with a standard username and password, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, whatever. I mean, these things today
are generic systemic points of failure and source of massive attacks that are underlying our society. So are we building this? I love this quote from Evgeny Morozov. SMART is the acronym of surveillance, marketed as revolutionary technology. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, look at our governments, how they're also getting engaged in this area. They want to monitor everything. So is this fiction? Well, we all know Black Mirror, Well, it turns out that reality was there before the fiction. If you take this is a good example. I mean, Nosedive, episode 1, season 3 of Black Mirror, with basically the social credit system, the Chinese social credit system. It's a good example. I mean, it was invented long before the Netflix series, and it was designed in a way which, by the way, we have to understand that culturally, it does not mean it's bad, okay? We have to accommodate a variation of culture. If you take the 3 main doctrines here, you look at Europe with a history of philosophy and philosophers. We're going to talk about things, argue about liberties and stuff. If you go to more Asian countries, it's the culture of the collective. Okay, it's the we-ness. So it does make sense in an Asian culture, inherited from Confucian approaches and so on and so forth. So we shouldn't just, bash into that and say, this is evil. Okay, eventually it works in some cultures, and eventually people like it in some cultures. So we have to be careful. And you go to the North American doctrine, where $1 is $1, and if you can sell a hip for $1, well, why not? Even though it's immoral. So just to draw your attention on the fact that culture is extremely important. We're not going to figure out a way which is standard for everyone. Okay, we have to be careful with that. So this is a good example. That's another series of examples. I won't spend too much time on this, but you got, smart devices like those that were completely screwed up when they came out. I mean, people were freezing to death in their homes. Smart toys, smart appliances like the Samsung thing, which was listening into people's homes in their living rooms. Smart, vacuum cleaners here, which are sending back data to the designers of this device. Search engines for IoT devices, which eventually draws attention on the first DDoS attack that was conducted in 2015 using CCTV cameras, and that basically ran down a DNS service, which deprived people from accessing the internet for a long enough time. So these are examples. This is another example. I mean, touting our democracies. I mean, for crying out loud, this is important. That's an important thing. Democracy is at risk today. This is another example. Also, if you look at smart autonomous cars, again, I know, what does it mean to? And these papers came out also in 2015. Interesting, showing that basically what does the algorithm is going to do? What is it going to do if it's confronted with a situation of killing 10 kids or suiciding the occupant of the vehicle? Well, obviously, moral would command that we suicide the occupants. Now, the second question that was asked in this study is, would you buy such a car? And obviously, nobody would. Why would you buy something that can kill yourself? Or if you're a software engineer, you buy it, you open the thing, you reverse engineer the code, and you make sure that it doesn't kill you. Okay? Which again poses the issue or the question of tamper-resistant devices eventually. Okay. So these are all examples. A little story here. All fairy tales start with this notion, once upon a time. Okay. Well, are we going to remember in the history of mankind, this period of mankind as being something where people were concerned about privacy? What is it? Just go check out the Google toilet. It's a fun little thing. But is privacy just an accident in the time of humanity, or is it something which is important and that should last longer? So at the end of the day, this is one of the questions that I've been asking, how bad should bad be for people to reclaim their rights? And every time you have something that's happening, I say, oh, maybe this is going to draw sufficient attention so that people will, react and something will be done. Well, no, not even this, Snowden, 2013. I mean, not even Cambridge Analytica, nothing. Yeah, it makes a hype in the newspapers. They sell newspapers, and then the whole thing, okay, back to business. Let's carry on. So, what are the challenges here? Well, the biggest challenge that is behind all this is the business models. The business models are fundamentally broken. They only rely on a predatory approach to vampirize our data and to capture our attention. These are two major problems that we find in those business models. If you look at, for example, the CEO of Netflix, okay, a few years back, said his biggest competitor was sleep. Well, hell no. I mean, if you remove sleep from people's lives, we die. It's a fundamental essence of our humanity. If we don't sleep, we die. Or in other words, if you could sell, like a happy pill that would keep people awake 24 hours a day to watch his series and his movies on Netflix, then he would love it. What does that, what does that mean for us? So the business model, these are just two examples. That's the Cambridge Analytica thing, and this is basically the, fake news. You might have seen these movies. They're interesting. But the core point here is that the business models are flawed. They're broken. They cannot work. So this needs to change. So how are we going to change it? That's another story. This leads to this kind of we have to witness that the system is broken. So this is basically economic cynicism. Remember when the finance industry blew up in 2008? We saved companies on the fact that they were too big to fail. Or in other words, if they went bankrupt, it would be such a systemic damage to society that we have to save them. Now, these companies today are too fat to change. Why would they change a business model that's, they're milking the cow and nobody is basically asking them to change, not even us, not even governments, okay? So you have some attempts from a legislative or a regulatory perspective that are trying, the European data protection reform, which is interesting. It's an interesting example of basically public policies inviting themselves into the business models of companies, say, okay, this is not okay to do this way. Now you're accountable for protecting the data of data subjects. Okay. Now, any Koreans in the room? No? Okay, so I want to ask you the question what this is. This is the LG Science Park that was inaugurated in 2018 in Seoul, okay, northwest of Seoul. That's the president at the time of South Korea. Big thing. In if you look at it from in a nutshell, you're looking at a space of 1,100,000 square meters of office space, 4 or 5 billion construction, and room for 20 to 25,000 researchers in R&D for a private company, which is LG. Okay. And if you go to the website, you can still find it here today. You can read this. Here, LG will chart the right future for mankind. Hell no. Who is LG to tell me what is right? And even worse, to say this is right for mankind. No, this is not a private company who's going to be able to do this. So this sounded like a wake-up call for me in 2019. I gave a talk in Seoul on digital responsibility, and the guy from LG, was one of the VPs of LG, was there, and talking about this, saying, okay, we're putting the human at the center. It's beautiful. Okay, it's great. But then to the question of how many ethicists, sociologists, anthropologists, or philosophers will be among those 20 to 25,000 people, there was no answer, which was really alarming to me, because basically you're looking at, and only engineers who will be designing solutions to be sold to the industry. Okay, so what are the opportunities? This is a little framework that we worked on in fact in 2017 that I mentioned before. And consider it the 3 dimensions of digital responsibility. Now, obviously, we have the industry. The industry, they're concerned with selling stuff, okay, which is legitimate. You know, in a liberal economy, you have a company, has to make profit, has to sell things, fair enough. But they have a very limited, if not non-existent, responsibility in their designs. Okay, that's really, it's really a problem. What is the part where responsibility is built in by design in those devices and systems and services? Well, today, time to market commands, marketing commands, finance commands, and you have to sell stuff. Okay. Then you have the people. So this is part of corporate digital responsibility, which is the first dimension here, the one concerning the industry. Then you have people, you and me in our daily lives. We're not going to turn people into software engineers or cryptographers. That makes no sense. You know, at the time I was running crypto parties to help people, better understand cryptography and setting up a secure email, a PGP key and stuff like that. And then one day I said, okay, stop this. This should be baked in by design. We should not have to turn ordinary people into software engineers or cryptography savvy people. This doesn't work. Okay, by design. So people live kind of in ignorance and bliss, and there's a kind of conveniency relationship between people and the industry. Okay, I have something to sell. Look at how your life is going to be marvelous if you buy my little connected smart toothbrush. And people just go to the supermarket and they buy stuff and they bring them back home. So this is part of personal digital responsibility, dealing with the issue of digital literacy. Okay, our public system of education today is not educating our young kids on digital literacy, or very little. In many countries, this is totally not working. So we need to improve that, and we need to help people get better literacy in their digital knowledge about using systems and services, which does not mean turning people into software engineers or technically competent people. If you look at digital literacy, there's only one of the 8 skills which is dealing with a technical matter. All the others are, more like, creativity, curating information, selecting information, expression, and so on and so forth. Okay? Critical thinking. And the last dimension is public digital responsibility, dealing with nation states. Now, what do nation states do? Well, they're supposed to protect people. Okay, when something doesn't work, they put the framework. Look at the finance industry. At some point, people started saying, okay, the party is over, it's finished, and you blew everything up. Now we need to put regulations, and you get Sarbanes-Oxley back in 20 years ago. You get anti-money laundering, and know your customer, and all these frameworks today, which are legal frameworks, in order to constrain the industry to do things right, because self-regulation does not work. These people, although they claim that, hey, don't worry, we've got it all solved for you. No, doesn't work. Self-regulation doesn't work. So nation states need to step in here, but they have concerns from a national security point of view, and they have concerns in economic development. So these people here will try to attract these people here because they bring good tax money. And these people here will try to negotiate with these people here in order to get advantages in transferring their headquarters into one country or another. Okay, so it's kind of that's an economic, it's relationship, but it's not very, I would say, I'm going to say that. Yeah, it's not very, how do you say that? It's healthy as a relationship. It's not a very healthy relationship. So altogether, this comprises of 3 dimensions of digital responsibility. Now, what can we do moving forward? So for the people dimension, we need to work on awareness and education. For public policies and nation state, this is governance and regulation, but be careful. Not everything needs to be a law. Law is the last instrument you have to have you have to use when all other mechanisms have failed. Okay, we should be humble with the use of law, as Larry Lessig said a long time ago. Okay, this is really something you use it last. And obviously for the industry, we need to work on this notion of responsible design. Okay, or in other words, going back to the business model issue I said before, the business model needs to change in order for the requirements that are fed to the software engineers and systems designers and developers to do things that are basically, from the point of view of a requirements engineering perspective, responsible, okay, digitally responsible. And that's corporate digital responsibility. The focus here is a lot on this part because I think we have a huge leverage here. This is working a little bit on its way, but they're lagging behind. And these people, we need to take care of them because it's not them that they're gonna, mobilize themselves. Okay. Some people, like 20 years ago, there were protests against DRM technology. People will go in the street and protest. You never get more like 20 or 50 people in the streets about that. Nobody really cares. Everybody went on, Pirate Bay and stuff and downloaded content, whatever. So, this being said, what are the elements that we need to be working on? So transparency is fundamentally important as a principle that we need to leverage in order to work on our designs of systems and services. This is one of the things that led me to work on this notion of co-compliance or collaborative compliance. The idea here is that if you are in a design approach that leverages transparency, okay, then at some point you have mechanisms not only to punish people but also to explain to them what they should do and how to improve themselves if they do wrong. Okay, so if I say, for example, I need to access this resource here, okay, and the system says no, because security is binary. You have access or you don't have access. So what do people do when they don't have access? They circumvent security, right? They go around and go there and get access to the resource. But this goes unnoticed. It's not traceable because they circumvented the system. So the claim here on transparency is basically say, okay, and that's the exception model I worked on, is saying, okay, well, you know what, guys, I have a piece of credential here. I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to take the resource. Okay, and this is logged because I need to get the job done. Now, if you have to say something to me because of what I'm doing here, I know that I'm doing good. But if eventually I'm doing wrong, come to me and tell me what I'm doing wrong, educate me, and I'll do better next time. Or you have to update your security policies because they're not working. Okay? So we're entering a dimension where you're empowering people in doing their jobs instead of restraining them and finding, deviated ways, untraceable deviated ways to get their jobs done. So to some extent, this is in terms of security, governance, and risk management, this is really important. So we designed models for that, worked pretty well. We transferred that to the industry in South Korea. The paradigm, though, here, which is really important, is this notion of informed trust. It's not blind. It's not, I'm accessing this resource and nobody has nothing to say about it. No, I put a credential here. So it's informed trust. By analogy with informed consent in data protection that everybody's familiar with today. Okay. But that's a paradigm shift. It's a representation of the world which is changing. In terms of security policy management in organizations, it's a massive change. Because you're going from a world of total control in a binary way to a world where you empower people to do things, but not in a blind way, but in a transparent way, which brings basically more trust and flexibility to people. So this works pretty well. Now, the interesting thing here is that when you talk about transparency, you cannot not talk about blockchain or digital ledger technology, okay? And although nothing is new, okay, we're basically 2008, 2009, the design that comes out, interestingly enough, comes at a time where the banking system is completely screwed up. And basically, this design addresses the issue of the untrustworthiness of trusted third parties. Okay, the banking system. This work flawed. The self-regulation doesn't work. And somebody comes up with a design based on existing, public key infrastructure, cryptography, distributed systems, peer-to-peer protocols. Everything was there for decades. And the guy puts out a design which, makes a lot of sense at some point in order to go towards a mechanism of distributed trust in a secure way. That's groundbreaking moment. So transparency in connection with blockchain and security and distributed systems brings about a piece of technology that is useful to design a more trustworthy society in terms of its systems and services. Now, examples, we look at corporate digital responsibility in action. Again, there are many ways and many projects that I've worked on in this. I'm just going to mention one here or a few here. The first one is, how do you get small and medium-sized enterprises to engage in digital responsibility from a corporate standpoint? Large companies, okay, they have chief digital transformation officers and all, and they know what they're doing. They're reading the law and they're making sure that the company adapts to the law or trying to anticipate a little bit the law. So the problem is not there. The question here is, how do you engage with these people to make sure that they address digital responsibility in their businesses? Okay, so we worked with a company, it's actually a foundation called Ethos in Switzerland. They basically counsel public pension funds on their investments. And public pension funds have a social responsibility in what they invest in for the pension funds of the people who work. Okay, and so they get their counseling from Ethos Foundation. And Ethos in 2018 started asking, that's where we started working with them. Okay, what do we do? Is it socially responsible to recommend buying shares of Facebook and these kind of companies? They felt there was a problem. So we started discussing, and this is where we engaged with them. We basically documented this in the paper here. And the whole idea was to move towards principles of digital responsibility for corporations, but in a way where we would be able to build an index to try to rank these companies. Now, there are two approaches here. One is you put out like a label that is sold by, consulting companies. They come in, they do some assessments, they sign a piece of paper, the company pays to get rid of the problem, and they get a nice big logo saying, oh yeah, you are beautiful. We didn't want that. This is why we wanted to go towards the avenue of self-assessments. Okay, or in other ways, how do you engage corporations to ask themselves the right questions, okay, and eventually to better themselves? Or in other words, to start working on a level of maturity approach where they would be able to raise awareness and empower themselves. It's not a problem if you are somewhere in level 2 on an issue and you know what to do next eventually. Okay, that's a good way of bringing the discussion within companies. Now, it makes more sense in SMEs than it does in large corporations, because I said before, these large corporations already have everything in place, right? So we designed basically that idea, looking at it from the point of view of large corporations, going through the foundation, asking the questions to the large corporations, and for the small and medium-sized enterprises, what we did is so these are the 7 dimensions that we came up with on digital responsibility You can have a little bit, you're gonna find basically the usual suspect. There are many frameworks doing that today, more or less, they're all the same, okay, more or less. But these are the ones that we retained cooperating with the Ethos Foundation. Now, what we did, so they conducted a study, and actually they're doing it 3 times. They did in 2022, 2023, and they're going to do the last one in 2024, based on an engagement that they took with large Swiss corporations traded in the public market. So the first study was depressing. The second study was a little bit less depressing, but still depressing. We're waiting January 24 to figure out if there's been any progress here, but hopefully Swiss companies will have made a little bit of progress. So these are documented in these links that you can find here if you're interested. And then for the small and medium-sized enterprise part, which I'm very sensitive about, because at some point I had my own small and medium-sized enterprise, and I know what it is to run a small company. And you have to basically fill the order book, and you have to pay the salaries. So you don't really have time to do fancy stuff about thinking about strategy and things like that. Okay, so I know it because I lived it. And so a lot of companies, small and medium-sized enterprises today, are confronted with these challenges that they don't have a clue what to do. So with the state of Geneva, we designed a service. So I put the link here. This is the test website. If you're interested, unfortunately it's in French. But in Canada, French is an official language. So eventually you can play with it if you want. Or otherwise you can go to Deephold for translation. But the whole point was to give a service to a small, medium-sized enterprise to basically self-assess themselves and to, based on, for example, if they were, for example, on this level here, which is really poor, sustainability of the system of the service, really poor, then how would you improve that? So depending on the current level they are in, we give them a recommendation for what's the next question they should work on. So they can talk about it in their companies and they can improve themselves. So they make that self-assessment. They're free to make it public or not. The whole service is not hosted by the state of Geneva. It's on my server that I pay from my lab. So I can guarantee data protection. No information specifically identifiable information is leaked. Okay. Now, on the other hand, the interesting thing is that it gives a tool to the state to basically measure where they should put their efforts. So, for example, if you look at, data management 2.4 compared to sustainability of systems and services, well, you're better off investing public money in that dimension rather than in this one. Okay. So it's a evidence-based policy management tool, gives them tools to do that. Now, all this also requires, no problem. All this also requires to be able to access the right data, right? And this is where transparency will be important, and to some extent, the use of public blockchains could be very useful to pursue too. This is another example. That's a project, that's a German project, and we're cooperating with them because we want to integrate with that service I mentioned before. They do basically natural language analysis and processing of public information that corporations release. And they're able to assess if what the company claims in their public documents is coherent with the statements that they make on digital responsibility. Okay, it's an interesting approach. A little bit of AI in there, and a lot of natural language processing, obviously because they crunch all the documents and the public information. So that's a project which is interesting. This is also something interesting. It's another approach to corporate digital responsibility. Rob Price is the guy who launched this. Basically, you have another framework here of principles, also 7, kind of more or less the same. And he's pushing that manifesto, and it's translated into, I think now 17 languages. And so we just last summer we translated it into Korean also. was important because I had a lot of ties with Korea, so I pushed for that. So that's an interesting thing. And the last thing here I want to talk about here is this project that we worked on. So this is more related to blockchain technology. In 2016, we got a grant from the Swiss National Science Foundation to study the impact of blockchain on audit and control as professions. Okay, like the big fours and what they do all the time. We had that feeling that transparency and distributed ledger technology could bring important other ways of looking at that practice. So that was a 4-year project. It eventually ended in 2022. So we ran it from 2018 to 2022. There's a paper, basically the last paper that came out very recently, last June, which basically kind of documents it, but more from an accounting and management standpoint. Now, the underlying technology that was, so one PhD student of mine worked on the infrastructure, and he designed this system as part of his PhD. Basically access it for free here. But basically it's a layered approach here, where we started by designing an abstraction to blockchain technology in order to, because we knew that companies would not want to engage with, Ethereum or, whatever. And we needed to have a common API that would be addressable by existing enterprise information systems. So we started by doing this, a blockchain abstraction layer. Then we designed an intermediate layer here, which we called kind of framework services, where for the purpose of our project, we worked on one of those components here called track and trace in the context of audit and control. Because audit and control needs to basically access content, make sure, verify things, verify conditions, document traces, make assessments, control assessments, and so on and so forth. So this is basically a business intermediary layer that can be tuned, and this offers an API to basically enterprise information systems. Now, the good thing here is that having that approach, layered approach, basically allows us to have 3 levels, different levels of deployment. We can use that as just, a minimal level of deployment where you just throw stuff in the ledger. And whoever needs to access to verify stuff can do it. The second level, well, you get this, but you throw in also the notion of checking on the process integrity, okay, and the execution of some controls that you can automate. And the more advanced deployments would basically put on-chain execution of controls and verifications. Okay, so it's cumulative. So level 2, it's level 1 plus this, and level 3, it's level 2 plus this. Okay, so you basically have an environment where you can start minimal just by logging. Then you can do a basic set of controls or a more advanced execution of controls. Okay, so we've been working with large consulting companies all along the project. We had a kind of an advisory with them regularly to make sure that what we were doing made sense for them. Now, all these consultancy companies have their own blockchain teams already working on many of these topics. But for some reason, nothing really tangible is really coming out. We're not seeing concrete deployments of ledger-based, distributed ledger-based, mechanisms out there. So this is why we think it's important to work towards that direction. So here, everything is available, everything is open source, the code is on the Git, the papers are public. If you're interested in that, this is something we really like to push forward, because we think if we look at it from the point of view of corporate digital responsibility, audit and control is going to play a key role in the coming, in the very next times, okay? Just think about ESG, environment, sustainable and governance issues, criteria, which are inviting themselves, like corporate social responsibility 25 years ago. Now ESG criteria are definitely part of the equation for corporations. And just look at Apple, for example. They've been bragging about how sustainable their business is in the last keynote speech, but a couple of weeks back, right? So you could feel, that it's getting important. Now, we are absolutely convinced that transparency and immutability of traces are a key part of that transformation of business, especially regarding ESG and the requirements that are growing. To give you an example, Switzerland will be introducing shortly an obligation for corporations to report on greenhouse gas emissions. It's going to be mandatory. Nobody has a clue how to do it, right? Well, we can do something here with that. Okay. So that's a good use case eventually, ESG. And then there's plenty of business use case. Warranty processes, probably one of those processes that everybody hates, but people selling stuff, they have warranty, that they put on the stuff they sell. And then you get a whole, ecosystem of actors. People who use them, they're not happy, it's broken, you have to go to the repair shop, then you have an accident, there's the police, there's the insurance company. Warranty processes and insurance claims basically are one of those nightmare processes, multi-stakeholder, where it's very interesting to throw in a piece of technology of a distributed ledger to instrument it. And there's a nice project that a long time ago, University of Zurich with Claudio Tessano, they were also working on that a long time ago with the car industry on insurance that existed also. It's an old project, but it's been running for a while. Last but not least, if you look at this whole issue of corporate digital responsibility, I mentioned South Korea because I think South Korea is an interesting player. They flood the world with their designs. LG, Samsung, Hyundai, and all these chaebols. Basically, they're king of the world. They're 10th economy in the world. They're not copying, they're innovating. And they claim that they know the right future for mankind. Well, hell no. We need to put some order there. So the idea is to launch this conference, an international interdisciplinary conference on digital responsibility. And we want to launch it in South Korea. So the goal for now is 2025. Okay. And we want to attach to that conference a scientific journal and a business review journal, because there's going to be an industry day in the conference too. So we're working on that. If you are interested in that, get in touch with me. We're just starting the setup of that project. So, advisory boards and steering committees and program committees and all the disciplines that we need to put together, trying to find the support from outlets like, IEEE or ACM or AIS or whatever, and other, scientific communities and other disciplines. So we're just starting there. So we're really, that's part also call for action. If you're interested, get in touch with me. I'd love to grow that. Yesterday, we had this event online. Cheng, you were there. Thank you very much. So maybe also, we want to, based on yesterday, we thought we would start a dialogue. So this is going to be an every 2 months, 90 minutes of discussion. Bloxburg is an academic blockchain. It's an association, okay, started by the Max Planck Society in Germany. And the goal is to have a blockchain for science. Okay. So this is really important because it's very different from most blockchain infrastructure that you can find today. Either you run your test nets on your own, it's kind of playing in in a sandbox. This is the goal, is to really support science by blockchain, and also to develop that infrastructure. So blockchain, and these are the kind of discussions we're going to probably be pursuing with Vicky and you and people here at the Blockchain Center. See if UBC wants to, eventually become part. Could be interesting also. We already have 50 universities around the world. Okay, so it's not a matter of proving that thing works. It's a matter of building an even broader community around it. One of the very important and interesting scenarios or use cases here is credentials. Be it diplomas, be it micro credentials, be it assessing, the work of students and stuff like that. Especially if you look at mobility, a lot of students start, they do a bit of their bachelor in one university, then they move on to another university for 6 months, a year. They go to a third university for a master's degree, and eventually end up somewhere else, a PhD, in which they basically go back to another place. And you have all this issue about, credit systems, recognition of what people do. And, we all went through that. It's a nightmare. You have to go and see notaries to make, to get stamps sticked on pieces of paper, and they're broken. Okay, it doesn't work. So that's an interesting, also use case scenario. This being said, I thank you very much for your attention. I really pledge and hope that we can build a digitally responsible society. I hope I've made a little bit of the case, bridging that notion between digital responsibility and transparency and blockchain technology, how it serves that purpose. Okay, and I think that's the key message I'd like you to take away from today. And I'd love to further talk and take questions.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions? Either from the room or from the people online. Any questions from Zoom?
One question. So,
Yeah.
Talk about Switzerland. So what is the regulation of cryptocurrency in Swiss Explorer research? I think it's pretty good.
The regulation, so Switzerland.
Regulation of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is, although Switzerland is not brilliant in terms of, even if the requirements, if you look at, innovation, Switzerland always appears number one, okay, because they're best in the world. But there's a reason to that. It's because of the pharma industry and the patents from the pharma industry. That's why they're number one in the world. Now, if you look at technology and digital transition, I mean, Switzerland is probably like below the basement. Okay. Now, the point you're making on legislation and cryptocurrencies, there's this whole issue of the crypto valley in Zug. Everybody has heard about Zug and the crypto valley. Now, the interesting thing that Switzerland did here is that basically they adopted an approach that they should adopt much more, and it's called sandbox laws. So they made a small piece of law in order to allow startups working in the crypto industry and the crypto assets industry to basically not require the high-end, licenses, banking licenses of Switzerland, which are just unachievable by a startup company. That's why it kind of blossomed better, because they had this kind of organic approach favoring innovation in that context, in that industry, for startups in crypto assets.
Any quants like a company like a finance quant company that's I think it's capital.
Oh yeah.
So what is the regulation of the extremely volatile industry like hedge fund industry?
So I wouldn't be able to answer the specific question because I don't know enough of finance. Okay, so my answer would not be reasonable. Probably have to check things.
Another big question, what is your take on, the blockchain being embedded into the gaming sector? Now, I work on the game development, we try to embody the blockchain and people with the time scheme inside the game. Given the regulated public, what is your take on that?
So that's an interesting use case. One of my former students basically started long time before NFTs to work with. He basically built NFTs while NFTs didn't exist. So he had a card playing game which was based on blockchain, real physical cards, but which had an equivalent in the blockchain. Okay, and the digital trading of assets, digital assets for the game was there a long time ago. So I think these are interesting mechanisms. This is a use case. Okay, the gaming industry and distributed ledger technology, and basically looking at it now. NFTs is like people were talking like about NFTs, like putting if they could put their grandmother on an NFT, they could do it, right? It's like the guy the son of John Lennon, who basically took one of his coats and took a picture, so made an NFT out of it and sold it. Doesn't make sense. Now, I think there are valid use cases for these, and definitely the gaming industry is a very interesting use case, but we should be careful how we approach it.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Any questions from Zoom? Okay, if there's no question, if there's no any more question, let's thank Professor Morin again for his wonderful presentation. And if you want to listen to the presentation again, you can go to our website, Blockchain UBC website, and we will upload it when we have the recording ready. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.